I'm David McDougall, I'm Strategy Director at Studio Output.
I'm Anna, I'm a designer at Studio Output.
And we're here to talk about a project called the Positive Platform, which is an R&D project myself and Anna did to redesign social media to hopefully be less negative to people's mental health. So hi everyone. That was a really great talk. Awesome. So I'm David, I'm Strategy Director at Studio Output.
And Anna, designer at Studio Output.
And we wanted to talk to you about a project that we've finished late last year, actually, which was an R&D project that we conducted as part of a studio project scheme that we have at Studio Output, which is about doing R&D projects within the team, really quick, rapid projects that hopefully act as kind of inspiration for our internal team, but give us something really interesting to work on that's not necessarily commercial and lets us kind of be good designers. Looking at really interesting things. And this one really kind of came out through thinking about mental health, because it's something that's really kind of in the forefront of everyone's minds at the moment. And I think it's massively important for our industry and for particularly the social platforms that we're all spending lots and lots of time on. And we're just going to run you through some of the things that we've thought about, some of the questions we've asked ourselves, and hopefully should be interesting for you. I guess it kind of started out for me thinking about stuff like this that I was starting to read. And, you know, when you think of the amount of time we all spend on social, well, that's just gone louder. When we think about the amount of time we spend on social and start to read headlines that actually those platforms are really, really can be quite poor for our mental health, that's quite a big issue, I think, really. And if you think the amount of time that's there and the amount of time we're using things to be using something that's not actually that great for us. And it kind of led me to that question of saying, well, what's the difference between those two brands in that case, in terms of their social responsibility towards their customers and their users, their brand reputation, the responsibility they've got to provide healthy products or healthy environments or things that are good for us that they're making money out of us from. And so we kind of sat down and we thought, well, as designers, what does that mean, and how can we start to kind of investigate that problem? So we started to ask ourselves questions like this that said, well, what if we redesigned a social platform to reduce the harmful effects it had on particularly young people's mental health? Could you do that? Could you, as designers, start to think about that as a problem, and what would that mean? So we set ourselves 2 weeks.
I think 1 solid week, and then a couple of days to put the case study together.
It felt like 2 weeks at the time. We set ourselves a really short amount of time just to start looking at that problem. And we've got this process that we use for these projects, which is called a double diamond, which is just a way that we can do a really, really rapid project, which takes us from understanding a problem, really kind of diving into how big that problem is, defining what we want to try and solve, then kind of blowing things out again to explore it, and then ultimately getting to a really nice set of solutions at the end of it. So it's quite a nice process when you're doing a really short project. So we kind of asked ourselves these kind of questions that says, well, what if a platform was designed to consider their effects on us? Is that part of a product brief that the social platforms really think about? What if we tracked our mental health like we tracked our physical health? We've all got Nike Plus, we've all got Fitbits, we've all got tracking on our handsets. Well, what if we did that for our mental health as well as our physical health? And what if platforms had more responsibility towards their users? And what if we counted content calories like we counted a calorie in a Big Mac? You know, what if we thought of it in that way? What might that mean? So we did a little bit of work just to understand this space. You know, a lot of the kind of input into a design project for us is about understanding the problems you're trying to solve. And we didn't know this entire world inside out, so we wanted to research young people's attitudes to content. We wanted to research the tech space, how people are using content, and to research mental health, you know, to understand that space so we knew what we were designing for. And that gave us some really, really good insights. It gave us some insights into how platforms are designed. It gave us some insights into reports that are commissioned by Royal Society for Public Health. They got some great data on this. Gave us insights into the kind of technology that was available and the kind of things that maybe detect our blood pressure and our heart rates to tell people when they're anxious. It would probably be going through the scale right now.
Talk about it, Dave.
Yeah. Do you know, this is really hard. So we kind of learnt things like the amount of young people who are affected by addiction to social media. We learnt about stuff, particularly social media machine learning, to essentially say that machine learning can detect whether someone's depressed by their Instagram data. That's pretty interesting, I think, when you think if you were to look at how people are posting, you can learn how they feel. And we've got stuff around how there's a really good correlation between people who are really heavy users of social media and those that are more likely to suffer from mental health issues like anxiety and depression. But we don't know which comes first. We don't know if people who are suffering from anxiety and depression are using social more, or if they're suffering from anxiety and depression because of their social usage. We just know there's a correlation. And of all the platforms that we all use every day, Instagram and Snapchat are seen as the most negative. So that gave us some really good insight into the kind of problems that we wanted to try and solve. So we set out on this project, which was about saying, is it all too good to be true? And that's our kind of creative strategy kickoff point. And we wanted to explore how an interface was designed, how the content's designed, how platform design can be looked at to reduce their negative impacts on our mental health, and particularly on the image-led platforms, because the research is showing that they're the most problematic. So, yeah, we kind of set out on that journey, really. And what kind of came out of that was essentially lots and lots of ideas, lots of kind of really broad thinking ideas. Our starting point was just to brainstorm all these problems and brainstorm the questions we were asking, brainstorm the kinds of things we might look to solve. But then out of that came essentially a set of questions, and against each of these questions, we just did a really small design exploration to say, well, is there something in this? Is there something we can design? And we've got like 5 or 6 that we'll kind of just run you through. And I think the first is to say, well, what if a social algorithm that's used to serve ads to us could be used in a way that could control the content that we're seeing, to be a bit more mindful of what we're being served? There's so many data points that a social platform's got on us. Can that be used in a way that's more beneficial to our mental health? So if you think about your biometric data you're getting detected through an Apple Watch, you might think, well, we can detect stress. We can detect, are you using Instagram at 2:00 in the morning and just scrolling through loads and loads of stuff? How much stuff are you sharing and how much stuff are you liking that are your close friends versus people you've never met in your entire life? All those kind of inputs could essentially control what you were fed and what content you were given. And this idea that you could control the cadence of how stuff was posted, you could control the content, just to make it a more structured and more mindful place. If a social platform can hyper-target advertising, they can also hyper-target content that should be better for us, I think.
And what if profiles and followings had well-being indicators? This is the next question we explored. We're all familiar with the traffic light rating system used in food packaging that allow us to distinguish between a healthy from an unhealthy food. And we started to think, could we start to identify healthier from unhealthier accounts and start to rate them on a healthy scale, and then potentially could use factors like body image and photo manipulation and sentiment, and just help the general public to identify healthier from a healthier account, and then potentially start to build features like safe mode.
Yeah, and the platforms can detect whether an image is being manipulated. It can detect how much body images in a particular feed. It could detect how frequently that user's posting. So essentially be able to give us that clue to help us understand who we might follow.
What if you could make better connections with fewer people? So research shows that we can only hold close connections with a small number of people, and something I think Instagram and all social media platforms are really good at is to help us connect with people, but they could also start to help us prioritize the content from those that matter the most to us. So could we start to create features like the inner circle, where you select a small network of friends, and every time you'd log into your Instagram account, their content would be shown first. So no matter how long you've got to go on your social media, you would always have things that are closer to your heart put forward and given priority. What if you had a more mindful mode? So this idea came from the thought that we could start using our phones in a healthier way, and also if we wanted to control how we use our social media, we should do so in an OS level, because we can't just be controlling all the different social apps one at a time. So the idea that we could start controlling things like how we track our usage, setting up quiet zones or night shifts, and basically just control how we use it in an OS level rather than just in all the different social media apps.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of stuff's really interesting when you think Instagram's basically designed to be addictive. Is there a way of trying to make it less addictive by choice? And you essentially have a little bit more control of how you use it, and you're not purely controlled by what's essentially been designed to be a hyper addictive platform.
What if social platforms could coach users on healthy usage in the same way they reminded us about privacy or friend anniversaries? So we know that social platforms can predict whether a user is at risk of feeling depression or anxiety, and they can do that through machine learning, content analysis, and content pattern. So that means that they could target users at risk and send them coaching hints and tips. And if they would create features like a quiet zone, that would mean you could potentially determine using geolocation technology that you don't want to be disturbed where else you're at your desk, or if you're on a date and you want some privacy and you don't get notifications, for example. Or we could also create the digestion time or catch-up time feature that would allow you to snooze your notifications for a period of time, create a favorite friend feature as well, turn off your notifications and just try to control the overuse of your social media, and also create a night shift mode to just help create a bit more of an emotional balance. What if we tracked our mental health like we tracked our physical health? So I think we're all familiar with apps like Dave mentioned earlier, like Nike Plus or even Monzo. So if we can track how we spend our money, how much fitness we do, could we start to visualize how much time we spend on our social media? And then could we also start to set up goals into how we want to evolve, and potentially be sent tips and insights into how we could improve our interaction with our social platforms, and potentially help improve our mental health, at least within that field. What if we use that newfound time for something more meaningful? I think one of the most addictive qualities of social media is like the constant scroll, and you're always getting like a dopamine hit of something new. And I think often all we need to, potentially stop a quite unhealthy habit is just a little bit of inspiration. So we thought about creating this app that would just send us like randomly chosen ideas that would help potentially improve our mental health. So could we, take a deep breath when you're feeling anxious? Or could you go for a walk? I'll do it now. Or could you start learning Spanish on Duolingo? And this could be quite interesting because it could actually work.
We saw a guy's tweet. Was it a tweet? Who said he'd given up Instagram or Twitter for a month, and in that time learnt Spanish. And you think, well, actually, that's a pretty good use of your time where you're not on Twitter. So those are just loads of really short design explorations. And what we then started to get to is think, well, if we've learned all that kind of stuff, and some of it's really valid, some of it's just a thought starter, what does that mean for if you're a product owner? If you're a product owner in a platform, what kinds of rules, what kind of guidance do you start to develop for how you develop a platform or how you build a product that is a little bit more mindful? And you start to think, well, guidelines like let users tell you who are the most important people in their lives. Don't kind of assume . maybe you prioritize deeper connections over more connections. How do you build that into your platform to encourage people to connect to those they've got better connections with? Use your data not just to sell advertising, but to produce a really positive experience that safeguards people. Give users control and give them the ability and the processes to use your product more healthily. Recognize people's need for calm as well as their need for connections. Coach people on protecting their own well-being. So that idea of coaching people through their feed into how to use your product more effectively, I think, is really interesting. And really to end it, really, just to say, well, allow people to express themselves and develop community, because there's loads of really, really positive parts of social. It's not a negative space in any stretch of the imagination. It's actually a really positive space. So make sure we're kind of building those positive kind of ideas into the platforms. So so that's been our little project.
So far we've had good response on the social media. At least, I mean, if we haven't built any of these apps, at least we got people talking about the subject, and we even got to talk to a Canadian radio on an interview, didn't we?
We did. Mooses have feelings too. Do you know what I think's quite interesting is we're just starting to see more and more stuff published by the platforms, published by the digital world, really trying to focus on this as an issue. I think Mark Zuckerberg blogged earlier a couple of weeks ago, really saying that he's got a responsibility to make their platform really good for people's well-being as well as fun. And I just think we're going to see more and more of it in terms of responsibility as product owners or responsibility as platforms to kind of look after us, I think, and to build things that are kind of more healthy for us. So, that was our little design project.
Thank you.